All right. So we are once again, good evening, everybody. Welcome back. We are here, IHSA basketball officials. We have a wide range, Alan, just so you know, we have a wide range from very beginning officials all the way up to veteran officials that are 30, 40, 50 plus year officials on the call tonight. So we're definitely going to have a great session. I will say that Alan has been very generous in sharing his time and his experience with us on tonight. So I'm definitely hoping that you guys take some notes. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll definitely answer your questions during the Q&A session towards the end after he finishes his presentation. You may hear some things that, again, that may be new to you. You may hear some things that you may be familiar with. But again, this is about informing everyone to make sure that we are well aware of our job and everything that goes along with our job from a legal aspect. All right. So without further ado, Jeff, did you have anything you wanted to chime in on before we get started?
Yes. First off, this is probably going to be the meat of what we're going to talk about tonight. There are some things maybe at the very end we will talk about, maybe more basketball related, but I also want to welcome Alan being there. It was very nice to see his presentation in person. Also, which was very ironic. Referee Magazine is reviewing a bunch of their articles that they have done over the years, and one was a situation that I may ask Alan about. He may talk about it in his presentation, but he was referenced, and this was about 10 years ago, about an incident that happened in Louisiana. That he talked about, and I actually agree with them, but I'll let him talk about that. So, guys, this is very important. We don't sometimes realize that we have liabilities that are associated with our sports that we do, and it doesn't matter the sport. And Alan will definitely cover that. So this is very much needed and needs to be paid attention to. We do this sometimes in our local area, but Alan has a reach that is across the country or really across the world in many respects because these are things that'll come up now. Keep in mind that there are differences in different places. I'm sure he will cover that, but the basics of what we do and how the legal side can affect us is very important. So please pay attention to this and ask questions. Do not leave this without asking a question about something because this is why we do this so that you guys can get some good information. That's really all I have to say.
Absolutely. Thank you. By the way, our state interpreter, Gary Gustafson, couldn't make it on the call today. Today is his birthday. So his wife had dinner plans, so he couldn't attend tonight, but he definitely wished us well. And definitely, he said he'll get in touch to try to reach out to you at a later time, Alan. But he definitely wanted to send his best regards to everybody on the call tonight.
Thanks.
All right. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Alan Goldberger is an attorney based in Fairfield, Illinois, Fairfield, New Jersey, whose practice focuses on sports and business law, sports and athletic risk management, and nonprofit association law. A former three-sport game official who officiated high school and college basketball and baseball and high school football for more than 3 decades, Allen works with officials associations, other sports organizations, and business enterprises to navigate a variety of legal issues, including those arising out of officiating, sports administration, governance, athletic competition, contractual relations, and governing body affiliations. He is the author of, and I got your book, Alan, just so you know.
Oh, excellent. Thank you there. Thank you very much.
Got that book, and this is a great read. I highly encourage everybody to get this book. He is the author of Sports Officiating: A Legal Guide, now in his second edition, and a co-author of Sports, Physical Activity, and the Law, a college textbook, now in his third edition. He serves as chair of the American Bar Association Nonprofit Athletic and Recreation Association Subcommittee, and he's taught sports law at the college level. Most recently, the adjunct instructor for sports law at Fairleigh Dickinson University Masters of Sports Law program. Allen has been a featured speaker to conferences on legal issues in sports and officiating, including the National Association of Sports Officials, also known as Nassau, the Officiating Summit 2020, 2003 through present. So he's been a guest speaker there just about every year. He's also affiliated with the International Approved of Basketball Officials, IBO Inc., American Bar Association, Atlantic 10 Conference, Patriot League Developmental Camp, the U.S. Lacrosse National Convention, Gamekeepers D1 Professional Development Clinic, PIAA District 4 Football Officials Clinic, National Intramural Recreation Association, National Police Athletic League, National Sports Concussion Coalition, New Jersey Council of Administrators of Health and Physical Education, Athletic Trainers Society of New Jersey, and many state and local high school athletic associations, colleges, universities, school districts, and state and regional official associations in California, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, New Hampshire, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Missouri, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Texas, Virginia, and Washington. He has an extensive bio, as you can tell. A longtime editorial contributor to Referee Magazine, Allen's work has received broad media coverage, appearing in national publications including Athletic Business Magazine, Sports Business Daily, USA Football Newsletter, the Sport Intelligence Research Center, and newspaper, radio and television appearances, including CBS This Morning, ABC News, Good Morning America, the New York Times, MSNBC Weekend with Alex Witt, New NBC News Today Show, NBC Evening News, CNN, ESPN, USA Today, Fox News, News OK, NJBIZ, Fox and Friends, New Jersey Law Journal, the New York Times, Fox News, Fox and Friends, ABC Radio Sports Talk with Art Russ Jr., My Nine New York Television News, AM Best Insurance Law podcast series, It's Official newsletter of the National Association of Sports Officials and Athletic Business Magazine. Alan Goldberger is a member of the New Jersey, New York, and Maryland bars and is admitted to practice before the U.S. District Court of the District of New Jersey, the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. He is a graduate of Franklin and Marshall College and Rutgers School of Law, Rutgers University School of Law. So without further ado, our guest speaker, Mr. Alan Goldberger. Take it away, Alan.
Ernest, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody, and I appreciate your taking the time to come to our session tonight. We're going to be talking about basically the officiating intersection with the law that is becoming more and more pronounced, as many of us know, and some of us find out the hard way every day. I was an active official for, as Clarence said, quite a long time, and I kind of miss it. Now I don't have to, now that I'm off the field about close to 20 years, I don't have to hear what the supervisor telling me I did wrong. I can just watch what other people do wrong. But officiating today, to my mind, is more difficult, more complex, and more risky than ever before. So let's get into it. Over the past 2 years, there have been 3 court decisions in the United States of America, all on lawsuits seeking to overturn officials' calls. Now, this doesn't happen every day, but 3 times a year is too much. And we have no way of knowing exactly how many claims there are, but the ones that make the wire services and are reported come to our attention. And that's way too much for anybody's liking. These lawsuits resulted, and they didn't all come out well. Some did, but whether they did or they didn't, once the lawsuit is started, you have a national media firestorm. Now, how it is that officials navigate the rules and the law to manage the risk of moving from this particular court to this court is a question I'm going to try to answer a little bit in the brief time we have tonight. Okay, I wonder if I can, Clarence, if I can move these. Let me see, I'm going to try to move your handsome faces around a little so I can see the slide. There I am. That's better. Now I'm in better shape. Sorry about that. Okay. Can you all still see the screen? Yes. Good. Okay. So what laws can change the rules of our game, our great game of basketball? We're never going to find out if I can't change the slide. Wait a minute. How did I do this here? Oh, here we are. Hold it now. Back up a second. Whoa. I'm sorry, folks. I just jumped ahead about 10 there without even realizing. Okay. All right. We have the rule of law and the law of rules. What does that mean? Let me move this over a little bit here. Okay. The rule of law means, or at one time anyway, it meant everyone is subject to the laws established for orderly society to function. And I hope in some places it still does. The law of rules means that people who compete in a sport agree to follow the rules of the sport. Now, who gets to make this happen? We do. It's the official's contractual duty to enforce the rules of the game, which we all know. We prevent certain actions. If we're alert enough, we impose penalties for infractions, and we probably get most of them. Okay, rules enforcement is the official's contractual responsibility. How do we do it? Okay, officials' pregame duties are specified, and we have the reference to the NFHS rules code here for basketball, Rule 2.4, and IRG, which is the IBO rules guide, which is not the officials' rules, but a pretty good guide to the rules, at section 3.4. Okay, first off, very, very important, folks, and I'm going to be talking about a lot of what some officials regard as little things. And let me just preface my remarks a little bit by telling you in officiating, there is no little thing. Because in a firestorm, little things become very big things as our detractors look for ways that we might have made a mistake that they could catch 3 quarters earlier. So the first thing that we need to discuss really in a substantive way is this terrific IHSS recommendation of the pregame medical huddle. I've talked to Clarence about this a little bit before. I understand it doesn't always happen in all sports, in all games, before the beginning of the games, exactly the way we may like it to happen, but it's an invitation to officials to expand their pregame meeting with the head coaches to the site manager or administrator and to the approved healthcare professionals if they are there, obviously, and on duty, and if they would like to attend. But whether they attend or not, the pregame meeting with the coaches, one thing we have to do in Illinois, and this is why I'm putting this up here up front, is we have to ask the head coaches to identify their school's healthcare professional if he or she happens to be working that night or that day and they are in the building, which if they're working, we hope they are. But very important, and we'll talk about it later, to know whether or not the schools have the appropriate healthcare professional as designated by the school in cooperation with the state association, or if they don't have an appropriate healthcare professional that day or that night for that game. So we're going to need it later. So just keep that in your back pocket. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Keys to manage your exposure to liability. I've got 6 of them. 6 keys to keep the game on the court instead of in the court. And here is a list, a little preview of what's to come. Key 1, which we're going to go into in a minute or two, 1 rule, 1 interpretation, a basic tenet of IBO, and it should be a basic tenet of more of us. And when I say more of us, I say more of sports officials than it's a basic tenet for right now. And that's very, very important. Obviously, that's why it's up there in red ink. Key 2, hair. Key 3, head. Key 4, dress. Key 5, mess. Key 6, pest. I was never much of a poet, but I thought I'd take the opportunity. All of these things, though, are keys to managing all of our exposures to liability. Key 1, 1 rule, 1 interpretation. There is little, folks, in my judgment, that is more important than this when we're on the court. And it's all the time for whatever governing body or conference we're working for, from the first scrimmage through the last game of the season. Officials have, in addition to their integrity, if they're good, the knowledge and the courage to enforce the rules, to allow reason and substance to prevail over emotion and volume. Now, if I don't know how many people are in the room, Clarence, but if I were to ask everybody in the room to put up their hand if while they're officiating they hear more reason and substance than emotion and volume, I don't think we'd have one hand raised. I'm not sure about that, but very important for us to be the voice of reason and substance when we referee. The anatomy of the playing rules, the rules makers decide, obviously, what our game should look like. They decide what every game should look like. We decide how that all happens. The playing rules and the regulations govern our game. We get, as we know, from National Federation. We get others from the State High School Athletic Association, who is fortunate to have one of the most dynamic executive staffs in the nation. So I think you're in good hands there. And the state government and sometimes other governing bodies. In our game, we have that as well. We have privatization of sports. So it's their rules and our obligation. And by the way, one other thing, you're looking now at a state legislative chamber in Maryland. I picked that because it was the oldest one in the country. State law is the law of the gym if your game happens to be in a state where there's a law that pertains to the sport that you're working and the activities that are going on there. So we have to be very sensitive at all time to what I call the geography of rules enforcement. Tonight, obviously, we're focused on the geography of Illinois rule enforcement, and we'll stick to that a little bit. But obviously, when you go across the border there, you're in a different land, and the law may not be the same. Okay? So first off, before we even get out on the court, are we instructing our officials regarding the governing body, the high school association, and the administrative regulations that govern the state where the game is played? Very important to have sensitivity and awareness of that. When we enforce the rules of tonight's game, is there a modification or approvals in place to modify rules or accommodate student athletes who may have certain needs? Our officials can't administer this properly unless they know about it. It needs to be communicated to them so that there are no surprises before tip-off or even during the game. Knowledge, awareness, and impartiality are three things that we have to have. And the best among us definitely have awareness. Almost all of us, almost everybody I've ever known has impartiality. Knowledge, it's fine, but we're officials. We're not magicians. We have to be told what tonight's rules are. They have to be published to us, and the protocols have to be published to us. Key two, hair. And this is basically in chronological order because one thing sometimes we have to deal with before the game are things relating to hair. And my next key is, and it's no surprise, number three, I believe, is going to be head. So hair and head, let's get into it a little bit. Here's what you have to know. There's hair control and there's hairstyles. Okay? I don't have to worry about hairstyles myself much longer, but I do when I'm officiating. What we need to know, hairstyles, it's pretty simple. Officials do not discuss hairstyles. And I'm not talking just about IBO officials. I'm talking about any sport, but certainly in our sport, officials do not discuss hairstyles in any way, shape, or form. How come? State law is how come. State law is how come, and we have one in Illinois, like in the majority of states in the United States. It's called, in general terms, Crown Law or Crown Act. It's an acronym for sports loves acronyms. So here's another one: creating a respectful and open world for natural hair. What does this mean? Illinois law, and the statute is right here, says that like most states that have enacted these laws that race is defined as including hairstyles historically associated with race. What does that mean? Discrimination on the basis of hairstyles is racial discrimination under the law. Racial discrimination. A school cannot have a policy in Illinois that restricts hairstyles in any way, including the hairstyles historically associated with race, but anything else as well. Race, ethnicity, or hair texture, protective hairstyles, braids, locks, twists, what have you. That's what is the meaning of the statute known collectively as the Brown Law. Race discrimination, certainly in Illinois, okay, includes hair discrimination. That's why, like we said a few minutes ago, we don't discuss hair. Hair doesn't matter. Other things may. Hair control matters, does it? Yes, we know that. For basketball officials, hair control matters. There are permitted items, and the list has loosened up a bit over probably about, I would say, 3 years ago, if my guess is right. Right now, we can use beads. Again, this isn't a problem for me personally, so I have to just do it from what I read in the book. But we can control hair with beads, barrettes, and bobby pins, if we like, as long as whatever we use is securely fastened close to the head and does not increase the risk of injury. That's the catch here, folks. It's not the hairstyle, it's the adornments. Securely fastened close to head and do not increase the risk of injury either to the person who is wearing the hair with the adornment or any other player on the court, teammate or opponent. Officials need to address any issues with clothing, uniform, adornments, apparel, or equipment only with the head coach. Only with the head coach. By the way, if anybody has questions like Clarence said, please just either put them in the chat or jot them down so I can get through bringing it at you, and then we can take them, so we make sure we get all of this material in. I can stay as long as we still have a question. I'd be glad to hang out here. So don't leave any questions unanswered. So where am I here now? Okay. Issues having to do with clothing, adornments, or equipment are only to be discussed with the head coach if we can, and we don't have all three-person crews, I know, but even if we have a two-person crew, if we need to have a discussion with the head coach, I say here on the slide, we need to have at least two officials present, if at all possible. And the way we do this in my neck of the woods, if whoever is the referee would likely be the one having the discussion with the coach, and then the partner would or should, if at all possible, be right up with the other two people, his teammate, his crewmate there, and the head coach. But the other official who is not doing the talking should be listening, but he or she also needs to be watching out there on the court, all the student athletes, and what's going on, so that we don't have our backs turned. That discussion about equipment or adornments or anything else is not with the player, it's with the head coach, and it does not contain, like we talked about before, any discussion of hairstyles. Does not contain any discussion of hairstyles. Okay, the safety kind of catch-all rule, NFHS 3.7, is still there. It says the referee shall not permit the player to use or wear any item that constitutes a safety concern. Who gets to decide that? Raise your hand, referees. We do, like everything else, right? So this is obviously much, much easier said than done. I mention it because it's still in the rule book, and we're still accountable to enforce that rule. Now let's go to our next key, which I threatened was coming. Key 3, head. Officiating the concussion rules. When the concussion rules changed forever in March of 2010, there was a lot of media hype. There were a lot of people saying referees are all upset. They have to diagnose concussion. That was never the case, that referees had to diagnose concussion, not in 2010 and not at any time since then. But the concussion rule is a rule that needs to be officiated, and there are two of them, as we know, in our game, 285 and 338. It also is a rule that is more or less the subject of state laws in every state in the United States, the District of Columbia, and a bunch of different cities and counties. So we really have the intersection of rules and law, officiating and law, right here in the concussion law. The Illinois state concussion law is cited up here, and it's interesting in the way it is worded, because it says a student must be removed, and I'm going to read this because I think it's important. A student must be removed from an interscholastic athletics practice or competition immediately if one of the following persons believes the student might have sustained a concussion. One of the following persons. And who's number 3 here? Anybody recognize themselves? It's the game official, as well as the other 6 people on that particular list. Let me back up for a second. Also, take note that the concussion rule applies to something called practice, which obviously would include either a scrimmage or any type of running up and down the court where your next door neighbor's a basketball coach and he asks you on Saturday morning to come over to the gym and blow a whistle. Because the concussion rule is the one rule in our game that applies to practices. So if you're blowing a whistle, whether you're in your tennis shorts or not, and there's a concussion type situation, be aware of this. Sounds like something a little far-fetched, but it does happen, folks. So concussion rules and the concussion laws, everyone I've ever read, and I've read almost all of them, applies to practice as well. Okay, here are the rules references, NFHS. And the rule, as we know now, because we are now, 15 years into it, basically talks about after a collision or a fall down, the presence of any one sign, system, or behavior consistent with concussion, okay, means that if any adult observes a student athlete after a fall down, he doesn't have to hit his head or her head, but a fall down or a collision with another person or an object or anything, if there's one sign, symptom, or behavior that is consistent with concussion, it's out of the game for that particular student athlete. And we all probably have read the list of signs, symptoms, and behaviors, and I put some of them up here. It's the usual suspects, the obvious disorientation, the dizziness, balance problems. Some of us, might ask a student athlete, who do you play for? And you get an answer, the Toronto Argonauts. That student is somewhat disoriented. So those are the signs and symptoms, and return to play does not happen under the rule until the student athlete, and unless the student athlete is cleared by an appropriate healthcare professional. That's why it's important that we know if each school has an appropriate healthcare professional on duty. What happens if there is not an appropriate healthcare professional on duty? If there's not an appropriate healthcare professional for that school on duty, then if the student athlete has one of these collisions or fall downs and has a sign, symptom, or behavior that's consistent with concussion, guess what? He's out of the game for the rest of the game. There's no coming back, without exception. And nobody will tell you or can tell you otherwise. So when you have a situation where you have a sign, symptom, or behavior of concussion, what we need to do is obviously, ostensibly, we've called timeout because that's how we noticed it, because somebody had a collision and we stopped the game. But in those instances, if you have one of these situations, whether you notice it or the student athlete himself notices it and says, I have a headache or I'm dizzy, or whether the coach notices it, or whether the ATC notices it, or any other adult attending the team, There's no committee meetings here, folks. There's no debate. There's no consensus building. There's no vote, and there's no excuses. It's out of the game for that student athlete. Just plain out of the game at that point. One more time. Okay? No committee meetings, no debate, no consensus building. No, maybe he's okay. No vote, no excuses. We inform, obviously, the head coach. We shouldn't have to inform the head coach. They should know already, but just in case, just to make sure, inform the head coach. The IHSA protocol indicates that, according to their interpretation, if there is an appropriate healthcare professional, and if they confirm that the student athlete did not sustain a concussion, then the head coach can advise the officials and return to play may be permitted. It probably you will probably be glad that you took the time to shake the healthcare professional's paw at that meeting before the game, so that you can look over to him or her and say, Mary, he's okay, and she'll give you the nod or the thumbs up or whatever. But the coach can advise you that the healthcare professional has confirmed there's no concussion. For my money, it only takes another couple of seconds to confirm that with the healthcare professional if they're around. I get it; they're not always around, and they may have given their blessing for return to play and then gone off to do something else. But it's good to be careful rather than not be sure what happened, because you need to have a report after the game anyway. So good to make sure that we know what the protocol is. And once again, to hammer it home again, if there is no healthcare professional, there's no return to play, no matter what. The superintendent, the principal, the governor, nobody can return that student athlete to play. You can't call a doctor in afterwards if they're not attending the team. There's just no return to play.
Alan, very quick question. Just because Illinois has a procedure, I wanted to ask your opinion about this. We are supposed to file in Illinois what we call a special report.
Yeah.
That has to be filed every time we have a concussion-like symptoms incident.
Yeah.
If we have a approved healthcare professional, do you recommend, from a legal standpoint, should we indicate who that person is that let that in, or should we just say they were returned to the game based off the healthcare professional? Because my understanding is Illinois, this is all a procedure within law where the state knows who these people are. They're supposed to know who these people are. And so is it good for us from a liability standpoint to put that in our report, even though it's not required, or should we just, let's say, take the word of the IHSA that they are backing that the person was let in from the proper personnel in the school?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And technically speaking, do you have to put the name of the healthcare professional in? No, you don't. But I don't think it can hurt anything if you have the name, and it's a good idea to have the name, to go ahead and put it in there, particularly if the doctor or the nurse or the neuropsych or whoever it was, if you were fortunate enough to have them attend your pregame meeting, and if you have made their acquaintance, then you know who it is, and you can put it down, you can get it right from the horse's mouth. In other circumstances, of course, if and I get this happens particularly in basketball, where you may not have a doctor around like you would in some other sports on duty. But if the coach just says, yeah, he's been approved by the healthcare professional, you may not see the healthcare professional at the time, and you may not know. So you let the student athlete back in, but you don't have the name. So it depends on the circumstances. Now, also, my advice to officials, and I know in every state you can't do it, but anytime you have to submit a report to the state association, that report should be screened by somebody in your board, preferably your board attorney, but certainly your board secretary, who sees all kinds of DQ reports and everything else. and special reports and incident reports. So it should be screened by another set of eyes to make sure that we don't have something other than the facts of the whatever the incident is reported. So that's a good question. If you do have the name and you are certain that if you heard it from the healthcare professional that the athlete is good to go, yeah, put the name in. That can't hurt. But if it's third hand, then I wouldn't start in with the name because just because if you haven't seen it happen and you haven't heard it with your own ears, then what are you doing? I wouldn't use the name if I, wasn't sure that that was what happened with my own ears. Does that answer the question, sort of?
Yeah, yes, it does. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, moving along now. Concussion rules are in the National Federation version, they're very clear. If you look at the state laws, and there are about 6 of them between the state laws and the counties and some of the cities, they're about as clear as mud. In some states, you can come back to play, okay, with the approval of the healthcare professional or other person designated, and others you can't come back. In states that are, and this map is a couple of years old, but these are some of the states where you can come back to play as of several years ago, last time I amassed that data. These are some of the states here where you can't come back no matter what after you come out, and New Jersey should be colored red in there because the statute changed on us. And these are some of the states where there's mass confusion among all the officials. How come? The protocols aren't clear and there are open questions. Okay? So that's the concussion law and the concussion rule. It's a rule that has to be officiated. And, we are the ones who have to take charge, particularly when the incident causing the potentially causing the concussion occurs. Okay, let's move on to key 4, dress. This is another situation where the law will intersect with officiating. I call it not so uniform uniforms. Several years ago, Illinois enacted a statute called the Uniform Modification for Modesty Statute. I have the beginning of the law here. It's modification of athletic or team uniform permitted. Okay, and the law says that if a student athlete has a religious or a cultural or just a modesty preference to change the uniform, that is okay. Okay, as long as, like with anything else in our game, whatever the modification is to the apparel doesn't interfere with the movement of the athlete or constitute a safety hazard. Headwear can be modified as long as face isn't covered and there are no opening elements around the face and neck and no parts extruding, pretty much what you'd expect, and it would not be otherwise dangerous. Okay, once again, the officials' pregame duties are important here. Issues with any of this, once again, need to be discussed with the head coach. Okay, the State High School Association is permitted in our game, as in all other national federation sports, to authorize exceptions to rules. Okay, to provide accommodations to those with disability or special needs and individuals with unique and extenuating circumstances. So what was a unique and extenuating circumstance, I should say, on Thursday may not be present on Sunday, but who gets to decide? We do, and none of this is particularly easy. If there's a medical necessity, okay, we may have to accommodate a student athlete. Again, we discuss only with the head coach. Key 5, I call mess. And this is where we get into what's actually going on out on the court. Mess number 1, controlling unsporting conduct. And this is a problem in Illinois. I only know that because it's a problem every place around the world. controlling unsporting conduct. Okay, get control of taunting and baiting early. Taunting and baiting are things that sometimes in the past, maybe some officials have heard this once or twice, are referred to as little stuff by some officials who have been working long enough to know better. No such thing as little stuff when it comes to taunting and baiting. None at all. There's a clear rule book definition. Any attempt to embarrass, ridicule, or demean the opponent. Also, NCAA has a rule that is substantively the same. The language is a little different, but if you can remember, embarrass, ridicule, and demean, I think we're a long way towards good enforcement of this rule. The wages of sin here are technical foul, obviously. Technical foul. And I know we have certain exceptions for bench personnel with some of this. Again, if you have it, if you see it, and if it's there, particularly with a player on the court, don't give any warnings. This is a technical foul. If you don't know what was said, but you see some scowling faces and you see some gestures that are made from one to the other, but you can't really tell what they're about, then it's like with anything else. If you think you have traveling, you don't. If you think it's a foul, it isn't. So if you think it may be taunting and baiting, you better see it or hear it, and you better be close enough to figure out that it actually was before you drop the boom. Okay? In that respect, dead balls are places where a lot of people get in trouble. During the dead ball period, once that whistle blows and the game is interrupted, we need to be careful to remember the first rule of officiating. To me, it's don't turn your back. Because a lot happens when backs are turned. And in a three-man crew, there's literally no excuse for not having at least one pair of eyes on the players and the benches at all times. And generally more than one pair of eyes. So the taunting and baiting is the subject of some interesting language in the IHSA protocols and instructions to officials. They speak to some things that we don't have as much back east as apparently you folks do there, but they're all good points. They speak to the bow and arrow, gun pointing, which under all circumstances at any place on the court or near the court by a team member is a technical foul. No exceptions for gun pointing. Bow and arrow, if you read in the advice, it talks about if it's facing somebody on the other team or the student section of the opponent. After a dunk, if there's a head tapping, in the opponent's face, blowing kisses to somebody who was just beaten on a play, the three symbol in somebody's face, or the raise the roof symbol in somebody's place, or in somebody's face, I should say, or the face clap. Okay, the more garden variety things we see in the East, finger pointing, flexing, the end of play stare down, or the stepping stone, which is mentioned also in the ISHA remarks on taunting and baiting, stepping over a player when it's not necessary. Head pat after a dunk, you see that? We have a little scenario called See My Number, Dude, where the uniform number is displayed for easy viewing by the wearer by pulling his jersey out in close proximity to the opponent. And then we have visiting hours where some student athletes think it's pretty cool to just stop by the opponent's bench, see what's doing for whatever effect that has. These are technical fouls, folks. Be sure you have them. But if you have them, my advice would be call it. Because there's no such thing as a ticky-tack foul. And that will be driven home to you when the fight starts 10 minutes after one of these. Let's talk about fighting for a little bit. This is a topic that is subject to a great deal of controversy among officials, many of whom have been taught for decades uh, this old spouse's tale: never touch a player, never touch a player for liability reasons. Stand back, try to get numbers, spread your arms, make sure the benches don't empty. Okay, managing the fight means managing the fight by not having one. How do you do that? Okay, first of all, understand, unless you're a boxing referee, don't permit players to fight. Do not permit players to fight. The best officials among us, okay, possess what I think are the two great attributes of great officials: concentration and quickness. Concentration and quickness. Okay, and if you don't believe me, and there are some people who say, oh, what's he talking about? That's not right. If you don't believe me, go to Google, put in basketball fights, lacrosse fight, any sport you like. Watch what happens. You see two people join at each other, maybe a little shove here, maybe some angry words, maybe some gestures. You're about 5 or 6 feet away. Take a step forward on the YouTube there, and then you take a step backward. Then you're thinking, wait, never touch a player. Then you take a step forward. And now all of a sudden, what happens? You lost the game because the fight has started. And now you're spreading your wings like Eliza Doolittle. You know, she could have spread her wings and done 1,000 things. Well, she can, but it won't help us in the game. So officials resort to all kinds of things to avoid managing the fight. But in every fight we have in a game, there's at least one participant who doesn't want to be there. And you need to give them the chance to back off by making sure they see those shirts and that uniform in the middle of it so that nothing happens. Can you always prevent the fight? No, you can't. But 99 times out of 100, your concentration and quickness will do it. Good example of some not too great sportsmanship here. You penalize the taunting and the baiting. The DQ rules, okay? DQs occurring before, during, and after the game, during your jurisdiction, you need to take. Key 6, pests. There are more than ever before, there are influences from outside the confines of the court and the benches that can ruin our game if we let them. Game disruptions, okay? The IHSA has a fascinating protocol and flow chart for officials to deal with hate speech. I'm not going to get into it now in great detail because it would take the rest of the night, but read that flow chart for what happens if hate speech is reported by an athlete to an official or the coach. Read it, print it, and save your legal neck. You need to follow what they say to do in terms of getting to the bottom of hate speech. We know that if it comes from the stands, we have a procedure to deal with that. Talk about that in a little bit. But getting back to the hate speech on the court, or maybe heard on the court, if it's reported, it has to be confronted. Okay, and if it's reported to the coach, the official needs to meet with both head coaches and the site manager. An official needs to ask the offender, this is, we're talking about a team member here, not a spectator, but the official needs to ask the offender to admit or not. If the offender admits, he or she is tossed, period. After the game, checked for flat tires. Well, that's part of the job. But that basically is the protocol if the offender admits the hate speech, even though maybe you didn't hear it. That's what they say to do. Other game disruptions: protest seeking attention, spectator hate speech. I have seen and heard spectator hate speech more than I wanted to. And officials sometimes don't hear it. What I tell officials is, if the student athletes hear it on the court coming from the bleachers, then you can be sure that you better listen a little better because the game has to be stopped in the event of hate speech and the spectators have to be removed. Okay? We do not permit spectators to disrupt our game, nor do we address spectators directly. Officials, regardless of the sport, ought not be to engage in addressing spectators in any way, shape, or form, whether it's a complaint or a criticism or hate speech or anything else. We are not accountable to spectators, and what spectators want when they're jawing at an official is the attention of the official and for the official to bring the spectator up to peer level by making him an equal and engaging him in a conversation. None of us, obviously, and not to belabor the point, but none of us should have the least interest in the opinion of somebody whose only qualification to be in the venue is that they could afford the $2 for the ticket. So don't raise spectators to your level. Don't make them your peer. Certainly not during the game, but not before the game and not after the game either. Very important point. A lot of officials say when they hear that a spectator needs to be removed, they address the situation themselves with the spectator. That's a big mistake, folks. A lot of officials get assaulted that way or get accused of assault by addressing the spectator directly. We don't have to talk to them, and we should not talk to them. That is game administration's job, and it's our job to make them do it and to submit a report if for any reason they don't. So we need to be clear on that. What I call the three musketeers of game disruption: spectators seeking attention, hate speech and bench flotsam, people who are around the bench or the team areas. We don't really necessarily know if they're connected to the team or not, but they can cause a lot of trouble for officials who are trying to work a game. And then the third musketeer of game disruption are the staged protests at the venue that may have nothing at all to do with the players or the teams or anything other than wanting to get attention of the media. We have to be prepared to deal with those items and make sure that we send teams to their locker rooms if necessary, if something bad happens with people who are not directly involved in the game. Otherwise, we are making ourselves, as I said over here, eligible for trouble. Now, we do not attempt, and this is what we talk about when we say the game, the whole game, and nothing but the game. We do not attempt to referee these items. Okay? Game day gender eligibility, team roster challenges, gender orientation remarks, or remarks challenging eligibility, national anthem postures. We have had officials threatening athletes and teams with being penalized for kneeling or otherwise not standing at attention during the national anthem. Not our job, folks. Spectator misbehavior or disputes. Once again, we do not engage directly with spectators. Okay, any questions at this point? We're about done.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you, Alan. It's been a great presentation. I'm going to kind of scroll through the chat. There were a couple of questions or things that were brought up in the chat.
Hey, Coop, I have a comment and question while you're scrolling.
Okay, okay.
About the concussion thing. I had a game where a kid tried to dunk the ball. Guy hit his head on the rim, and the kid fell to the floor. And first body part that hit the floor was the back of his head. A guy comes out of the stands claiming to be his father and a neurosurgeon. He looked at the kid. It was about 9 seconds left to go in the game. He looked at the kid and decided that the kid was okay to play. The trainer had not made it back to wherever he was coming from at that point. And at this point, I'm like, well, I'm not letting this kid play. He hit the rim and he hit the floor. It's not going to happen. So, of course, the coach becomes irate, and the parent, we wasn't really irate, but he was defiant that he is a healthcare professional, and he believed he had the right to keep the kid in the game. So the trainer finally showed back up and confirmed who the guy was. I took his business card, and the kid played. The last 9 seconds of the game. But then as we were leaving, now they got this kid on the gurney, taking him to an ambulance. My question is, does the referee have the right to overrule a trainer or a doctor when it's clear to you that they're trying to keep this kid in the game in an effort to win the game?
Well, Johnny, let me back up a little. You said a lot of things here. Let me ask you this. The short answer to that is, well, let me ask you this. When you observed this student athlete hitting his head, did you observe him after that?
Yes. Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay. And did he exhibit, was he woozy? Was he dizzy? Did he exhibit any symptom or behavior that would be
Well,
consistent with concussion?
once he hit the floor, his eyes rolled up into his head,
Okay.
and the parent was right there. I mean, he came out of nowhere. I didn't see where he came from, but he got there
Right.
so fast. It was
Yeah.
as if he knew it was going to happen.
Okay, so in these situations, first of all, you do not really get involved in a conversation with the parent under any circumstances for any reason. Secondly, if you notice, and regardless of the time, remaining in the game, but if you notice the athlete has a symptom or behavior consistent with concussion, then he comes out of the game at that point. Whoever the healthcare professional is, if they have one, will make a decision and can make a decision according to Illinois to have him return to play. But that's only after he comes out of the game and then he is evaluated by whoever the healthcare professional is. Uh, the parent or anybody coming out of the stands is nobody. So he's out of the picture altogether. But the school, under the Iowa regulations, has the right to have the healthcare professional present and make some kind of evaluation and indicate to the coach that it's not a concussion, at which point the student athlete can return to play, but only under those circumstances. It's not, the neurosurgeon coming out of the stands, father or not. It's not anybody else, and certainly isn't the coach. So the procedure is the same, regardless of who else may appear and start to offer advice. And like you said, the kid's removed by ambulance now. Well, that tells you something. But you have to put somebody in that condition out of the game, and then whether or not they're cleared to return to play is not really your business. Now, there are instances where in states where you can come back, the student athlete has come back, and then like sometime thereafter, later in the game, or maybe not so much later in the game, but sometime after the game has commenced again, all of a sudden the student athlete is dizzy again or whatever he is, and he's on the floor or he's disoriented. Well, then the kid has to come out again. And it's the same process. But there's no, whether it's a parent or not, there's nobody from the bleachers who's going to, rule this situation and get away with it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Jamila, you want to address your question?
Hi. Yeah, I was doing a game and a young lady had beads in her hair. And I made sure, or at least I thought, I made sure she securely put her beads up because I know we couldn't tell her to take them out. And she did. However, during the game, during play, the beads fell everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
No one got hurt, but in
Yeah.
that process, if someone were to get hurt, who would be liable for that?
Well, the way you describe it, if she put the beads up, so if they were close to the head and they didn't present a hazard, well, I don't know that anybody would be liable for it, but you know, you did what you had to do. They were in legal position when she had them tied, when she had the hair tied with them.
Okay.
And as long, you know, it's one thing to have the beads up and close and secure. And then, you know, I mean, things happen in the game, they get unsecure. But that's not to me, that's not the same thing as having a student athlete with a ponytail that's 3 feet long and these, you know, 17 beads hanging from the end of it, right?
Right.
So you know, you correctly said that, you know, these beads have to be fastened or you have to do something to fasten your hair if the beads are going to be it. But, you know, you can't prevent an accident from happening all the time. And so, you know, there's a lot of moving parts to a basketball player, and the beads came loose. So what? You know, they were legal. They were legal when you inspected her head and saw that that she had them fastened and close to the head, and they weren't presenting a hazard then. So things become sometimes hazardous during play. That was another example, but you know you can't beat yourself up about that because what was your alternative to say? Well, they're not tight enough. Yeah, you could say that they have to
Yeah.
be close to the head and secure. So that's a judgment call. And of course, you know, it's going to be your fault no matter what, but I don't think anybody's going to be able to successfully take you to task because the beads came loose.
Gotcha. And then
Unless there were people who, and, you know, I mean, people say funny things, but people could testify, well, they weren't really as close to the head and secure. That becomes a question of fact. You know, athletes and teammates and parents have been known to tell a fib or two about these things also over the years.
yeah, yeah, I know. Yep.
Yeah.
I have a question about the shoot. The antagonizing of players and all that.
Right, right.
So I know in basketball, I mean in high school basketball, we're able to do a little bit more than NCAA. I know in NCAA they were saying that if it's not directly at a player, the taunting and all that, we don't have to give them a technical foul. Say, like for instance, noticed that the bench is doing like dances on the bench after someone is like dunked on or something like that. What's your take on that?
Well, once again, it's like anything else. You know, you have to see it. And it like one of those Supreme Court justices said about pornography. I know it when I see it. But the thing is that I think from your perspective as an official, um, you have to be sure that the action, whatever it was, whether it's a gesture or words or some kind of action that was taken, you have to be sure that that's intended to embarrass, ridicule, or demean the opponent. That's your judgment. If you're sure of that, and it's a player on the court, this is a technical foul. If you're not sure, it's like anything else, you let it go. I don't particularly recommend making an issue of it if you're not sure, because if you're not sure it happened, then you know, you can talk to the player, but personally, I think discretion is the better part of valor. I would not get involved with discussions. The only time I would get involved with discussions, if I'm not, if I don't have taunting and baiting, is if I see two opponents and they are grimacing, and obviously they're having an unpleasant conversation, but I can't tell what it is because I'm too far away and I'm not a good lip reader. then, you could, it would be appropriate there, knock it off, both of you. And you get this, you see this in post play sometime. If both parties are equally contested for whatever it is, or complicit simultaneously, a short word may be helpful. But, if you're not sure, I would leave it alone. But if you are sure, it doesn't take a lot. Call the technical, now they got four left or whatever it is. I had one years ago. It was one of the leagues that was not the best basketball, frankly, in the world. Uh, but we had a silly old common foul in the first quarter, and the dribbler who was fouled had walked near his bench, and then he decided to turn around and throw a chest pass, not particularly hard one, but just throw a chest pass over to the opponent who fouled him. And what do you think? What do you think the opponent does? He throws a chest pass back. Okay, what do you do with that? Here's what I did. I had three fouls on the play. The foul I called originally, the personal foul, then I had a technical foul on each of those gentlemen. And for the rest of the night, I had choir boys, all of them.
Gotcha.
That's the way you deal with it. Otherwise, 20 minutes later with 3:12 left in the fourth quarter, now the elbows are thrown, and now you're tossing out four people for fighting and wondering why. Well, that's why. That's why, because you passed on something that created a danger to the student athletes. And these things don't generally happen by accident.
Absolutely.
They generally don't happen by accident. And that's the way to prevent it. And you need to use the tools that you have, and they get the picture. That's why I say to get it early if you have it.
Yeah.
Because in the fourth quarter, it doesn't go over as big if you let it go for three quarters and didn't call it.
Thanks, Al.
Sure.
I had a quick question.
Someone has a question.
Wait, and by the way, hold on, real quick. I just want to make a highlight for those that are IBO members. There's a under the members section, there's a summary of uniform equipment and apparel. It shows shows examples of the rule for the National Federation, and I think it's in the IBO book as well, about what is kind of head coverings from beads to things. It gives visual examples of what they look like. And Alan is right. It's been about 3 or 4 years that they put in the rules where they changed the rules about beads and certain things. So these are just a visual example so that you can reference if you are not sure about what looks legal and what isn't. That's a good guide to it. I just wanted to add
they have those nice color pictures there.
Yes.
Yeah.
I got a quick question.
Absolutely. Hold on. We got some questions I'm trying to address in the chat real quick. One of the questions, Alan, is what liabilities does an official face when a fight occurs? Also, why is it important that we don't get between players who are ready to fight?
What was that last part of the question? Why is it important that we don't?
Yes,
or that we do?
We do.
No,
we don't.
We
get
do.
between players.
We do. We do, because all they need is to see that striped shirt for a second, and then you've prevented the fight instead of standing there like a deer in headlights. Right? You see, the problem with officiating, Clarence, on that level, and is that when a fight is brewing, when something bad is going to happen, okay, officials have been trained for so long not to do anything that they don't do anything, which is the exact thing that the scientists and the veterinarians tell us about deer in headlights. Deer in headlights vision is diminished in headlights a lot, so they don't do anything because they don't know what to do. And it's the same with us. So if we act like deer in headlights, we get what we deserve. We get what we deserve. All of these, I'm not going to say all, 99% of these situations can be avoided if the officials are alert and if they move quickly. Okay, you know, it's well documented. Like I said, all you have to do is look at YouTube's and you see who the $3 bills are in these situations. And if you watch the greatest officials in the world, you're going to see that they don't have many fights in their games, and if they do, the average one lasts about 3 seconds, if that. Some people cite the NBA as a good example, and for that purpose, it is. Now, I get it that the NBA players don't have very long to leave the premises if they're ejected, but that's beside the point. You have to be quick and you have to concentrate, and you can't be caught standing flat-footed in one of these situations. Okay, and it doesn't mean grabbing somebody and putting a horse collar on them. It just means moving quickly and decisively. And we see this in all the sports. And if you're content to stand around and watch while your game goes down the tubes, I can't help you.
So with that being said, just to kind of piggyback off what you just stated, so let's just say hypothetically a situation, you get team A, team B, two opponents who were, kind of verbally going at each other. And let's say the official doesn't try to step between those players. But the fight causes some bodily injury or some things like that. And a potential lawsuit may be, coming down the pipeline. Hypothetically speaking, would the officials possibly be liable for something in that regard?
Well, Clarence, the short, there's an immunity statute like in a lot of states in Illinois. You would have to prove, gross negligence. I mean, most of the time, officials are not liable for things that happen, but there's a big difference between not being liable and having to go through a lawsuit. Okay. Voltaire said, I was ruined twice in my life. Once when I lost a lawsuit and once when I won a lawsuit. So the key here in all of this, is to avoid the claim. We avoid the claim by avoiding injuries, and we avoid injuries by being alert. So the ultimate liability, and I hear a lot of guys, even guys who run their officials boards, and they run their officials boards under the practice of like Lewis Carroll wrote in one of those novels of his, verdict first, facts later. Guys shoot first and ask questions later. I've heard guys, officers of official associations, let them go ahead and sue us. Well, they don't really mean it, because when they go ahead and sue us, the only one who benefits, frankly, is me. But it's not a day at the park for any official who gets sued, let me tell you. Not a day at the park for anyone who gets sued. So what you do is because win, lose, or draw, you're not going to be a happy camper at the end of the day. And if the judge or the jury, doesn't like your story, you may end up losing too. So not really the issue is ultimate liability. We beat most of the suits, as near as I can tell. Not that there's a master index, but we beat most of the suits against officials. But that's sometimes after a long and drawn out and unpleasant battle in the court system. So you want to avoid all that, and it doesn't help your reputation or your standing too much to have coach announce how Jeff and Clarence lost control of the game Friday night. And look what happened. Somebody got cold cocked.
Absolutely.
So, if you're quick, the now deceased, unfortunately, there was an NFL referee, Clarence, Red Cashin, right, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but he was quoted as saying, officiating is like, 9/10 of officiating is the ability to concentrate for 16 seconds at a time, 234 times in a row. And I think he was right. The ability to concentrate.
Absolutely.
It's Wayne Gretzky said, I think it was Wayne Gretzky said, you don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where the puck's going to be. And that's what we need to do. Because once we let it go, you know, the opponents start in, there's nobody to dissuade them, and bad things happen. Are you liable? Probably not, but who needs it?
Right. Right.
You know,
Yeah, we have
who
another
needs it?
question. We have another question in chat. It says if spectators causes a disruption and it causes the players to be distracted, should we call time and ensure that there is no unfair impact to the game?
Okay, well, that's kind of a two-part question.
Or
if the
causing
spectators
disruption?
cause the athletes to be distracted,
Mhm.
can you stop the game? Well, yes, you can. And should you? Probably in today's climate, you should. As long as you don't be suckered into giving somebody an advantage because somebody was planted in the stands. But under normal circumstances, if it's just the usual person of limited intelligence and abilities in the stands wants to draw attention to themselves, then yeah, you could stop the game. You really, by rule, of course, I think you have to go back to where you were when you stop the game. But obviously, if a spectator wants to ruin your game, then you have to really apprise the site manager, who you already met before the game, hopefully, like they tell you to do. You have to advise them to remove the offending person, and the game doesn't go on until that happens. And, that is with some administrations, unfortunately, at least by us back east, it has been a problem, but we certainly document it if it is, because that's not something we should have to put up with. But,
Right.
I don't know that there's anything other to be done. Um, Student athletes can be distracted by a lot of things, but, unless you have some evidence that it's somebody connected with the team who was planted in the bleachers, I'm not sure how much you can do in that regard, other than to put everything on ice for a little bit and sort things out.
Absolutely. We have some more questions. I'm trying to get through these questions real quick. So if you can help me out with that, that would be great. I had a
Sure.
couple of questions. Somebody says they had a couple of questions about a couple of different game situations that they had. First one was a kid hit his head on the court and was sent out due to no HCP. Is this correct? And then Bryce, if you want to unmute yourself and maybe just kind of explain what you're saying.
Yeah, in this situation, it was a youth game, a youth boys game. The kid had hit his head. I don't know exactly what had happened because I was on lead and my partner saw more to it. All I know is what he told me, that the kid had his head and he was disqualified because there was no person to release him back into the game.
It wasn't disqualified. He was removed from the game. He hit his head, and he had a sign or symptom consistent with
I don't know
concussion.
if he did it. I do
Well,
not know if he did it or not. All I know is he hit it.
well,
My partner,
that's
oh, he told me he hit his head.
Well, look, that is, first of all, let's get one thing straight about what, your body and everything. You don't have, number one, you don't have to hit your head or have any head trauma to have a concussion, because the concussion, and I'm certainly not a doctor, but the concussion, from what we read, the science tells us that it is brought about by the skull, the brain moving inside the skull, so that any type of violent or abrupt impact, whether it's to the head or not, can generate a concussion or concussive-like symptoms. So it doesn't have to be the head. But the consideration that we have as officials, and I hope this is closer to your question, is that something happens on the court. Hits his head, he doesn't hit his head, he collides with somebody. There's some impact, right? There's some impact with something. It's not just running down 96 feet, 94 feet and being winded. It's some kind of impact where something happens. The only question I would have if I was an official on that game is, do I see in this student, has he told me, or have his actions or words or mannerisms telegraph to me that he's exhibiting a sign of concussion, a symptom of concussion, or a behavior that's consistent with concussion. So, this could take many forms. I had a friend who was a football coach said, I had a kid with a concussion years ago. He got tackled, he jumped up, he smiled, he ran into the huddle. And my friend said, I knew he had a concussion. I said, well, that doesn't sound too strange. He smiled and ran into the huddle. And my friend says to me, Al, he ran into the other team's huddle. He said, that's how he knew. Ran into the opponent's huddle. So you have to look and see what you have. If you have a sign, symptom, or behavior, then here's the thing. You need a substitute. The student athlete's out of the game at that point. After that, if there is an appropriate healthcare professional, the state of Illinois tells us, or I should say the Illinois High School Association tells us you can let him back in if the approved healthcare professional says he is cleared to return to play and he did not have a concussion. Based on whatever they do on the sideline, we don't know. We don't know. So, and we don't evaluate that. If the healthcare professional is legit and he's among the class of those licensees who can be a healthcare professional, and he says the student athlete is cleared to return to play, he didn't have a concussion, we're supposed to accept that. Coach communicates it to us, and then he can come back in. And of course, this scenario could be repeated in a game also. But I mean, that's the only consideration we have. When we put somebody out of the game, we're not saying he or she has a concussion. That's, not something we could possibly say with any accuracy anyway, and we're not required to do it, and we shouldn't offer any opinion. I have seen officials say to coach, I think it may be a concussion. Wrong thing to say. Wrong thing to say. The correct thing to say while we're on the topic is, coach, number 8 needs a substitute because he's exhibiting a symptom behavior with a symptom or behavior consistent with concussion, or even, say under Rule 338, they won't know what you're talking about, but that's sufficient. Or say he told me he is nauseous. Or I asked him his name and he said Mary Lou, and it's a guy, whatever it is. But it's not, I think he may have a concussion. That's not really relevant. What's relevant is it some kind of behavior or indication that there may be a concussion? Because the science tells us that if a person becomes nauseated or disoriented after a collision, they may have a concussion. That's a behavior or a symptom. That's good enough to put them out and not good enough to let them stay in. But we need to be, like with everything, we need to be the adults in the venue.
Correct. Yeah. Someone else has a question. They said, if our partner or one of us as officials during a game were assaulted, how do we respond on the court?
Okay, well, if you're assaulted during the game, the first question is who done it? Obviously, if it's a player or coach or a bench personnel or someone connected with the team, that will generate a different report than if it was some fellow who got himself a ticket to sit in the bleachers and decided to assault the official. But that's the first thing to try to ascertain, because obviously there are different kinds of penalties for different types of actions depending on who done it. The other thing is don't attempt to fight back. You can protect yourself, but be aware that everybody in the gym, every place you go has one of these, right? And it takes pictures, and most of them record videos without too much knowledge. If I can do it, anybody can. So a snapshot caught at a moment in time could give the entirely wrong impression of what happened. So, you need to be careful to keep your hands to yourself. And then you need to make notes on what happened. Uh, Again, depending on the game and when it happens and what's going on with the game could be over at that point. Certainly, if you're knocked to the ground, that's an important consideration. But you need to make some notes, and obviously, if the police don't appear immediately, then someone has to dial 911. Police officers are very good people, but like the rest of us, they get scared sometimes, and sometimes they're sitting on a bridge chair outside the locker room door, and you don't hear from them. Okay, we had an official whose wrist was broken in three places by the father of a student athlete who walked right past a uniformed police officer sitting on one of those chairs outside of the officials' room. And he proceeded to break the official's wrist with his assault, and it was a 40-point game. Okay, so you need to get the police involved whenever you have an assault type situation, especially if the victim is you or a crewmate.
But Al, what if defending yourself is your only option in protecting yourself?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, if that's your only option, where's your partner?
I don't want a broken wrist.
Well, you don't want a broken wrist, but you may get one anyway, and you may get worse, and you may get in the films where it appears, and all officials know how films can lie, right? We all know how things aren't always as they appear. So all you have to do is be caught on tape, delivering a roundhouse to your attacker, and all of a sudden, what happens? You get to the municipal court or the police court, and what does the clerk type? She gets her keyboard. Okay. Uh, let's see. Adrian Smith reports that she was officiating a game at Northridge High School when she was involved in a fight. Good. So the rest of the free world, fights are what happens in games, and officials sometimes get popped, sometimes they deserve it. And it's no big deal. So if you're an official and you're involved in a fight at a game, you probably had it coming to you. People outside of officiating know nothing about us or what we do, and they care less. I'm very cynical, but I've been through too many of these things. That's why, and we don't have it so much anymore, thank God, here. But years ago, when we had officials assaulted, my office would send somebody, or I would go with the official actually to the municipal court to file the complaint. How come? Because when the official goes by himself or herself and says, I was assaulted, that clerk types down exactly what I just said. Said
Now,
Clarence Cooper reports that he was refereeing a basketball game and became involved in a fight. And if you're assaulted, that's not a fight, that's an assault.
right.
That's a crime. So, you got to be very, very careful knowing that your actions could easily be misconstrued when defending yourself. Because also you got to remember when these assaults, which fortunately are not usually the source of a serious or catastrophic injury, when they get into the court, the people and I'm sure it's no different in Illinois, the people in the lower level courts that aren't having the murder cases and the felonious assault and the shootings in the courts where you're going as somebody who's assaulted by somebody who's using their fist or a basketball or something to assault you. These judges and prosecutors are accustomed to people who are involved in barroom brawls. And everything to them where they hear assault means, oh, it's a barroom brawl. It's a fight. These two idiots are fighting with each other over, where their fence is on the backyard there, who stole apples or whatever it is. And they lump all of us in with all of these people who can't keep their hands off other people and get involved in barroom brawls. And that's not what we want. So we have to really be very, very careful and try to keep our composure in an assault situation. So can you defend yourself? Yes, you can. But it's better not to create a photo op for some imbecile with a cell phone to show you pummeling the spectator. And, it can be very, very deceiving. And with artificial intelligence, it can get worse. So,
That's true.
you need to be careful and hope that doesn't happen. Hopefully your partner will be alert like they should be to any fighting on the court and try to mitigate the problem there. But yeah, I mean, violence, we have officials asking about active shooters. What do they do then? This is the world we live in, unfortunately. Human life is devalued, and everybody's opinion. I mean, it's easy to. We're doing a piece for Referee Magazine about the accusation of a bad call is so easy to make. Anybody can do it. Any commentator can do it. Anybody, any 15-year-old on the internet who knows anything about graphics can make a very compelling case, knowing not the first thing about the rule book. We ask coaches sometimes at depositions, who publishes the rules? I don't know, the state. What color is the rule book? I don't know. Is there any other books that govern the conduct of high school softball or basketball? No. They never heard of a case book, maybe. I don't know. But, the point is that anybody can make the accusation, and it would be the same with an assault on an official. Always the official's fault. It's just like everybody's definition of a bad call. It's a bad call because it's a bad call. And most of these people, as we know, wouldn't know a bad call if it bit them on the leg.
Yeah. Hey, I've got two questions for you. One question is, and I know most officials have experienced this at some point in their career, where let's say you're assigned to a game, it's a two-person crew, and your partner doesn't show up to the game, or car breaks down or what have you. Should that one official go ahead and officiate that game by themselves? That's the first question. And the second question is, well, I'll let you answer that first, then I'll bring up the second question. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, we talked about this briefly. I know the thing is that years ago there were state associations, and I don't know if they still do, but they would tell you that if you don't have the right number of officials, ask the PA announcer to see if there's anybody who happens to be a licensed official in the stands, call somebody or try to get somebody. But if not, play the game anyway. I don't think that advice is so good in today's climate. And personally, it's not something that I would do. Even short a person, but certainly if it morphs into it was a two-person crew and now it's one person because one of the officials isn't there, I don't think it's something that I would undertake to referee because too much can go wrong. And, for what? Sometimes we forget, and we're very dedicated people, but sometimes we forget that what we're doing at these levels is not only a game, but it's a children's game. And the world will not come to an end if children's game might have to be postponed or put off. Baseball umpires know this very well. Lots of children's gamers rained out in the second inning or before they start. So, so what's the harm? And if something goes wrong in a game like that, what are they going to say? Jeff Rutledge elected to choose and chose of his own free will to work this game by himself, knowing the teams were vicious opponents and they had some difficulties in prior games, yet he chose to work the game himself. He could not get in good position to see all the terrible fouling that was going on by the end line or in the post because he was fixated on an out of bounds play from 2 minutes ago and blah, 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 blah. And right away, it's going to be our fault when something goes wrong. So it's not something that I would undertake to do and let them call me names, but I wouldn't do it because you're going to be the one who gets blamed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then piggybacking kind of off what you just stated, I know you mentioned about earlier in your presentation about there have been some officials who've gotten sued or potentially sued or litigation to some degree based on a bad call or a wrong call. Can you kind of explain that a little bit and like how that
Yes,
has
it's
happened or
and
or
this
that type of thing?
yeah, this happens. This happens. My guess would be we don't always have the statistics, but it happens frequently enough so that it's an annoyance and a problem, and injustice occurs sometimes. The official is usually not the one who is sued in these situations, but when there is a call that somebody feels is incorrect, and there's either film or rules references or something to support a theory that maybe the call was incorrect, whether it's a buzzer shot or something else, uh, or time expired or whatever the case may be, uh, the the school or the athlete or the parent involved will start a lawsuit in the civil court and claim that the disqualification, if it's an ejection of a student, or the result of the game should be nullified and
I'm
reversed, or
almost
the game
thinking
should
it's not worth watching basketball listening to this thing. Liability.
I'm sorry, what was the I didn't hear that. Hello?
I'm
I
sorry.
didn't hear.
Go ahead and finish stating what you were saying, Alan.
Yeah, so the lawsuit is generally not against the official directly, but it seeks to overturn the official's call, whether it's the official ejecting somebody or making a call in the game, or a crew awarding somebody an extra down or something like that, or misinterpreting a rule with the result that a team lost a game it should have won. And they ask the judge basically to sit as a replay official and reverse a terrible injustice. It happens typically with a student athlete who maybe is tossed out of a game, the college coaches can't see him the next game, and he'll lose his opportunity for a scholarship. And he's a senior, and he won't be able to play anymore because the last game of the season or the next game is the county finals, and he can't play in it, and he's suffered this terrible irreparable harm. One federal judge, and it did happen I believe it was a basketball game a couple of years ago, was faced with a lawsuit like that, and there's about a 70-year history of lawsuits like this in this country, and most of them end with an appellate court, an appeals court, not interfering with the official's calls. Oftentimes, a local judge will want to be a hero in the community, I suppose, and overreach a little bit, and he'll perceive or she will perceive an injustice and reverse an athlete's suspension and issue an injunction letting the athlete play the next game even though he should have been suspended, and things like this. This will happen. But normally speaking, the appeals judges who know a thing or two about bad calls will reverse a situation like that. And if there was, we just had a big case in Wisconsin with a wrestler that was in court for 5 years due to some poor decisions by judges, and that finally the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania just upheld the State Interscholastic Association in not reversing the student's disqualification for his ejection and his suspension, which he tried to do an end run around. There were a lot of details to it, but that was the basics. So the federal judge in the basketball game in Minnesota actually said, look, this student athlete was disqualified, and he says he would like the court to preserve the status quo by reversing that and letting him play the next game because it's his last chance to play this season or whatever it is. And she said something very insightful. She said, that's not exactly the status quo. So that argument fails. It's not the status quo because the call that put him out of the next game was a call made in a game in which he played under the rule. And the status quo is he got ejected and now he's suspended for the next game. That's the status quo. And she wasn't going to interfere with that. She was absolutely right. And she said, and by the way, his due process wasn't affected. He wasn't kicked off the team. He wasn't expelled from school. He wasn't even suspended from school. The status quo is there is a penalty for getting ejected for an unsporting flagrant foul, and he's paying the penalty for it. But that's nothing the courts should become involved in, and that's been the prevailing opinion for since about 1938 in this country. Has it always resolved in favor of the official and not reversing the official's call? No, but most of the time it has.
Now, on the flip side of that too, and I know we always talk about, especially with, when we're doing trainings, about how important it is for officials to enforce the rules as written. From a legal aspect, have you seen situations where officials, I guess for lack of a better phrase, kind of made their own rules or decided when they were going to enforce the rules versus when they weren't going to enforce the rules?
Well, lots of times, Clarence, and of course that doesn't do anybody any favors, because the only way we can be consistent, obviously, is not for Jeff to pick his rules, Al to pick his rules, and Clarence to pick his rules that he's going to enforce. And what happens is when it goes bad, it's usually because 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 officials earlier in the season at some game elected to pass on a situation, and then some guys come in from out of county near the end of the season. They make the correct call, and now they're villains. And now they're no good because, hell, she played with this equipment all season or whatever the case may be. So you don't do yourself any favor when you don't enforce all the rules, because we don't get to pick and choose the rules that we enforce. So if you're going to look the other way, like veteran officials will tell people, oh, don't worry about those beads. When is that going to happen? Well, that's all good and fine until when, you play with those beads in 12 games, and then the 13th game is the county finals, and here comes a couple officials in from out of county, and they enforce the rule. Now, what are they? They're terrible. They're taking this child's civil rights away. And we had one in a state in the East. It wasn't Illinois. Many years ago. Well, not that many years ago, before they changed the religious headwear rule. And just to give you an example of what happens, the religious headwear rule was such that you had to get a waiver in this particular state from the state association to wear a headwear that was not permitted by the rules, like a hijab that girl athletes wear in basketball, I guess, in all sports and in all times. And very easy to get a waiver. You contact the state office and you explain it and everything, and you get a waiver. So it's near the end of the season, like it always is. And there's a girl who is of Muslim faith who was wearing her hijab, and 3 officials come in from out of county. And where's your waiver? What waiver? Now she's crying hysterically because she's told, and coach is told, she can't play. Well, by the time everybody was done, the local civil rights organization was on the case. The student athlete's coach, a young woman, appeared at a press conference and said, I wish somebody would have told me about the rule, and then we could have got a waiver. And not one person in that press conference stood up and said, you mean you're coaching this girl in basketball and you don't know the rules that govern the playing of your sports? Nobody said that. What do you think the state association does? State association says, well, it's too bad in this case that the officials really elected to enforce the letter of the rule and not the spirit of the rule. That's how the officials were treated. Now, what would have happened had that hijab been worn and that hijab fallen off somewhere in the post play, and then some teammate or opponent or the little girl herself did a 1.5 off the sideboard, tripping on the garment, and tore her ACL? What would the state association have said then? It's too bad the officials didn't enforce the letter of the rule. Look what happened to this poor girl. So it's a game with many people, other than us, of heads I win, tails you lose. That's why we have to enforce all the rules from the beginning. Swimming official, swimming in Colorado about maybe 8 or 10 years ago, goes to, I don't even know if he got paid. He goes to work this swim meet, and there was some kind of a glucose meter that was activated by this student athlete from a transmitter with a piece of tape he wore on his arm. That was some kind of violation of something, unless you got a waiver. They didn't get a waiver. What do you think happens next? The United States Attorney in Colorado holds a press conference with the crying mother of the student athlete sitting at a table and says, never again will the poor athlete who is sick and wanted to compete be denied because of his disability. This official may have driven 2 hours to officiate the meet in the middle of the cold night in Denver, and that's what he got for his trouble, trying to obey the rules. That's why we don't do ourselves or our partners a favor when we look the other way. We just don't.
Yeah,
because the official is always the one who gets it in the neck.
And speaking of that, I mean, has there actually been situations, let's say Jeff and I are working a game and, you know, Jeff makes a call and, you know, whatever, for whatever reason, parents not happy and wants to go to court and sue. Does that potentially put me at risk as well, even though I'm not the calling official? Jeff made a call based on what he thought was right. And, you know,
I don't think it puts either of you at risk, Clarence.
okay.
Because in these cases, most of the time, first of all, the official is not a defendant, but they might as well be, because sometimes they have to testify in court. They always have to end up talking to lawyers. You don't want to be sitting across the desk from a character like me when you'd rather be with your family or at work. And, you know, it's a very unpleasant experience to have your ability and your professionalism and your credibility challenged in court. So, yeah, do you have an actual exposure? Not really, but it's a very unpleasant thing. Liability wise, you know, what's happened is that our credibility suffers with all these things, but not a case where damages are available or anything like that. But still, you know, a very unpleasant result. I mean, you folks may have heard about what happened at a little league tournament this past summer with a bat flipping incident. And, you know, that was one where a local judge just reversed what an official did. Instead of honoring the judgment call, it's reversed. Were the umpires sued? No, they weren't. Were they happy campers? I suspect not. So, yeah.
Alan, I have a question, just, you know, and we've covered a lot of good stuff. I want to discuss the article that I saw that you were referenced on in Referee Magazine about the incident in Louisiana, about the football official who got into it with the police and they were arrested and all this other stuff. I would kind of like you to discuss maybe some of our things that we need to be concerned about if those type of things happen, where we get blowback from the people at the game that is supposed to facilitate what we are following rules and
Yes,
situation. And just to give background to everybody, the article's on Referee Magazine. It's a Facebook article. I think it's on their webpage. But what basically happened was there was an official who got into it with a police officer who ended up having a child, I think, on one of the teams. He was just asking them to remove people that were basically from football in a restricted area. It'd be no different than if we were basketball officials telling people that it can't be within a certain perimeter of the court or under the basket or something like that. And the police officer ended up, long story short, arrested the individual and arrested one of the partners and took them to jail. There's a whole article about it. Alan, you discussed it, but one of the things I want you to discuss, if we have that kind of situation where we have some blowback from somebody that's supposed to be responsible for the situation, what is our role and what should our role be in those situations?
Yeah, that's a great point, Jeff. A great question. And the thing is, we have learned from our experience on this. You would think that the police presence and the security presence that are engaged to be at these venues would, exercise some kind of brain function, but it doesn't always happen. I personally have had several instances where I have had pushback from police officers on duty at never at basketball games, but at football games for some reason. We even had a situation where one of the police officers on duty was heckling our linesman who was on the other side of the field from me, who was a young guy, and totally unacceptable. The lesson to be learned here, and of course the Louisiana thing I wasn't involved in, but I read about like everybody else, and we talked about it at referee. But evidently it was some kind of deputy sheriff type who was had his friends because his son was, as you said, his son was on the home team or on one of the teams, and he had his friends there and relatives, and they're standing there having a good old time, and he thought he would impress everybody by arresting a couple of referees. And leading them off in handcuffs. Outrageous. So the lesson to be learned from this is there are people who are, a little short all over the place, and this obviously was one of them. This gentleman, I don't know what he thought he was doing, but the lesson to be learned is, and it probably is a good topic for another article as we're talking about it now. The lesson to be learned is, unfortunately, in today's climate, and even going back some in any climate, you can't necessarily be uh, reliant on security coming from outside the building. When the off-duty officers are engaged, um, uh, they don't necessarily have the best interest of the student athletes in mind. They have, speaking up when they see a bad call because they know the game in mind, and this, that, and the other thing. We had a situation where several years ago, the president of our local basketball association was the victim of hate speech the minute he and his two partners came out on the court. And we had to raise the issue with the school superintendent through the state association because the game security did nothing to remove these people who uttered the hate speech. And this was security that was engaged by the school administration. The superintendent was diligent enough and brave enough to end the season right there at that point. Only a few games left, but she did everything she could. But the point is, the Illinois pregame huddle is a real good idea. The point is, when you get someplace, you never know if today's going to be your day when the officers will start giving you a hard time. This was an extreme case in Louisiana, but not without precedent. Jeff, many years ago, there's a recorded case called Guffey versus Wyatt, where some police officer actually arrested a basketball official in the middle of the game, and the official received a big judgment against this police officer many years later. Well-known reported case, but the point is, you don't depend on any security because lots of times, I don't know how it is in Illinois, but lots of times around these parts, security will be an outside company. Maybe they can't get faculty to do it, or they're afraid and they get an outside company to come in, or they get off-duty police officers. You don't really know who you're getting, and you don't really know that whoever is the security personnel at the venue, Jeff, will subscribe to the view that basketball is really an extension of the classroom, and sportsmanship is very important. They subscribe to the theory that that was a bad call. What's the matter with you guys? So, you need to get game administration, somebody who is in charge of the building in your corner for these situations, because that's the only person you can legitimately depend on. And that's the only person that really, among this cast of characters, will be accountable to the State Interscholastic Association office when the roof falls in. So, I think you have to be understand that when you go in someplace, and you can't always do it, but you need to find out who's in charge of the building and the name and the title. You know, in the case with the basketball official from a few years ago that we had in New Jersey, where the officials were victims of slurs, the game was suspended for a few minutes, and in the dressing room, when the officials were in their dressing room waiting for the police from other towns to come, some woman who nobody had ever seen before, at least none of the officials had ever seen before, walked into the dressing room and said, I decide in this venue who's going to get ejected, and they're not going to get ejected. And of course, the official who was the referee on the game, who also is a police officer by profession, told this woman, no, you don't. And who are you? Because she didn't even have the grace to introduce herself, even then, even in that situation, to the officials. So, you know, you get someplace, you don't bother asking, maybe you know the AD, or, you want to get in, do the game, and get out. But very important these days to get to the person in charge of the building, stick out your paw, see who it is, and hold them accountable, because that's where you go to the state office when something like this happens. It's absolutely inexcusable in every respect. But the truth of the matter is, Jeff, and I don't accuse, certainly nothing I've seen in Illinois is evidence of this, but just generally around the country, Jeff, officials and officiating is an afterthought. I believe in Illinois, I think the problem is not as pronounced because, like I said, I think you have a very dynamic and alert and able state association in Illinois, headed by a super guy who is very attuned to officials. And you can tell that from his written materials. You can tell that from the instructions you guys have. It took me 45 minutes to read that protocol about, the hate speech. It was great.
Yeah.
So
Craig is really good.
He knows absolutely, he knows what officials have to go through. In other places, maybe they know it and maybe they've heard it, but you know what? It's not necessarily their concern all the time. And the cases where officials are abused and the people in control of an interscholastic association or a school district or a conference are dismissive and unresponsive are legion. Sad commentary. And maybe it goes back to the time when the personnel, the demographics of officiating were different. Years and years ago, if you go back to the 70s, I was a teenager at the time, but if you went back to the 70s, you found that most officials were engaged as either, if not teachers, as principals or superintendent or Board of Education business managers or coaches. And maybe Clarence was the football coach at one school and Jeff was the basketball coach, and they worked each other's games. I think there was a little more empathy maybe because so many officials were in education and they saw both sides of the equation. You don't have that today.
That's a great point.
Nor do you, and for that matter, in this climate we're living in, nor do you have much respect for human life or much respect for the law, unfortunately. So all of these factors, go to people who know nothing about the game or the sport and can't even spell common foul, are telling you what a bad call is and how outraged they are. And conspiracy theories all over the internet, where people get their news these days. How many times is there anybody here in the room who hasn't gone online and seen this big expose where 6 NFL officials were suspended and fined $1 million? All of these conspiracy theories, about everybody. Everything's fixed. Everything, they don't even know how to spell the word. And it's a conspiracy theory. This is what you have today in the news cycle. So there's not much in the way of reason or concern with facts. There's just what accusations can be made. I have had letters sent to me years ago, not just a recent, but I've had letters sent to me from state association offices saying, Clarence Cooper made a terrible call. The coach told us. Third quarter of our game. It cost us the game. The coach told us it was a terrible call. How do you explain this? And, basically how you explain this is you write back and say, look, dude, before you go making accusations, who is this guy? And how does he know it was a terrible call? Because he says so. But that's the type of correspondence you get sometimes, and that's the type of pushback you get. So, nobody really knows what we go through or cares what we go through for that matter. My theory is that a lot of people in this country think, if you ask them, that everybody in this room that we're in now, okay, every official in the world gets up in the morning, pulls the striped shirt over their head, and stares at the telephone. They don't get it that we have careers, we have families, we have occupations, we have skills, that we study and study and study and work to do this. You folks are sitting here, 9 o'clock at night, listening to me drone on and bray at you all these hours. Why? To get better. To get better, to get the calls right.
Absolutely.
How many appreciate? A lot of people do, but a lot more people don't, apparently. So that's what we're up against. And the ignorance is a badge of honor. Proudly ignorant.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to know the facts. They just know that volume beats rationality.
So true. So true.
Once the accusation is made, it's out there, right?
That's true. That is true. But thank you so much, Al, for being on the call with us tonight.
Sure.
Really
Thanks for
appreciate it. I put his book in the chat. You can get it on Amazon, or you can go to his website. I put his website on there as well. You guys can definitely check him out and support what he's doing. Again, he's speaking all over the country for different organizations. And we were just blessed enough to have him take a little bit of time out of his schedule tonight to be with us, and we greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much. Hopefully, you guys got a lot out of the training tonight. Got your questions answered. Even if you want to reach back out to him later on, if something kind of crosses your path and you got a question, feel free to reach out to him through his website, his email address. Definitely check it out, because again, we want to make sure that we're doing our job, doing our job the right way, and following the rules to keep ourselves out of as he said, out of the courtroom. We don't want to be in the courtroom. We want to stay on the court. So let's make sure we continue to do that. So thank you so much again, Al. Appreciate you. And we'll definitely look forward to seeing you at the IBO conference in the fall.
Yes, sir. We'll welcome you to sunny New Jersey.
Yes, we're looking forward to coming out there.
Hopefully it won't be 21 degrees there in September.
No, we hopefully it won't.
Okay.
But thanks again, Al.
You enjoyed it.
You. And any final words you want to share with everybody?
No, just that. Yeah. Well, now that you don't ever give a lawyer an opportunity, but yeah, if we were to back up a little here, and if I can do it, just that very end of it, just by way of if I can get back over to it here, just the takeaways. Aren't you glad you asked? Wait a minute now. Just these little tidbits to just take with you. We can get to them. Okay, here we are. Getting close. Okay. Know the legal limitation to the playing rules involving injuries, illness, hairdress, clothing, and equipment. Possess officiating awareness. Don't let anyone disrupt your game. Okay? And the whole game, nothing but the game.
Great.
I think those are the things we can kind of, put those in the bank. I think that will go a long way.
Absolutely. Well, once again, thank you for being on the call, being our guest speaker tonight. Definitely great and valuable information. Again, go on Amazon. You can get his book. I personally have it. I still go through it. It's a lot of great information. I would encourage you guys to get it just to be aware. Again, we know the society we're living in now. We just want to make sure that we cover in all aspects of our job, making sure we're being effective at our job. So knowing those rules and regulations of what we can and can't do, say and not say, and things like that is very important. So make sure you guys support his book, Sports Officiating, a Legal Guide, rights, responsibilities, and risk management. So again, thank you, Jeff. Anything you wanted to say before we get ready to wrap it up?
No, guys, just playoffs are coming soon. We will probably do one more meeting before the playoffs, and we'll send that out. But thank you, Alan, very much for it was very well done, and thank you for clearing up some things. And maybe if we have some other questions, we can have you back.
Definitely. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Clarence. Pleasure to be with you, gentlemen.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for being on the
call.
Everybody. We'll stick around and answer any few questions. Anybody may stick around and ask any questions about anything outside of what was presented. Feel free to stick around. Thank you very much. Have a good night, everybody. Good night.
You too. Thanks.